Ashish, again presenting you Oxfam podcast.
I'm with Action 3. In fact, the founder of Action 8 is also the founder of Oxfam.
I know.
So interestingly, we have the same genes.
And in that particular context, when these dialogues come, then it is being perceived that decolonization is perhaps a rat hole.
I think you hit the right point, Delta. We're a lower riparian. Whatever is happening globally is impacting us. They come on the basis of their competencies, their own contributions in terms of knowledge leadership, innovation. Then that is decolonizing.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum and namaste everyone. We are here in the second part of our podcast with Farah on decolonization and understanding decolonization in the lens of sovereignty and nationalism. So thank you, Farah, for giving your time. And we have been discussing in the first part the whole aspect of decolonization, the action, its own experiences of having been registered as a Bangladeshi organization and different dilemmas that generally we face. The current context is very interesting, in which we see a rise of, say, authoritarian, majoritarian kind of ruling everywhere.
Not majoritarian.
No, but many places. I mean, it's perceived that way. It's perceived that way, right? Where the core values are being contested on two dimensions. One dimension is what is the right for people, universally. Another is what is right for my country. So this whole nationalist country feeling is rising everywhere, and which cannot be challenged as such, as a wrong or right. But then when you apply this whole aspect of decolonization, organizations becoming more, does that mean they are becoming more nationalist? Is it very easy to conclude that way? What is your experience?
Thank you, Ashish, for inviting me again to speak. This is a very difficult question because it is related to global context and geopolitics. And as we see globally, there is only one concept now, capitalism.
Indeed.
And capitalism is ruling everywhere. So universal values,
Correct.
After the Second World War, the global leadership had come together and put down Universal Declaration of Human Rights with the intention that we have universal values. But they were not themselves practicing it.
Correct.
And now, in today's world, everyone's been exposed. And there was this notion that countries in the North were the moral guardians. They had a moral high ground, right?
Correct.
And the South was still, just coming out of colonial history. They were transforming. They were incompetent. They didn't have the knowledge leadership. They didn't have the infrastructure. They didn't have the technology. So it was in a different form. The North was still trying to control. The North was still trying to rule. So decolonization as such had not happened. And it was manifested when it came to aid, when it came to, why does the IMF have to tell you, or the World Bank and such institution have to tell you how to run your economy? Because the understanding is in the global South, there's no leadership capable or competent.
Correct.
They would put down the conditions on which you run your country.
Yeah.
So this has been one level, and where countries in the South have to struggle and come out of this control and take on what is relevant, what is important in their context.
Yeah.
Even this whole index through which we measure poverty, it comes from the North.
Correct. Yeah.
And that needs to change.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
The questions of gender equity, questions of inclusion, it's all being handed down from the North. But we in the South over the decades have realized that we have our own struggles. We also have our own strength.
Indeed.
It's not all weakness.
Correct.
And so when we started doing this, I think in the north we started seeing more rightist governments coming in, more governments taking on the issue of national, so-called national interests.
Correct.
Because there was not very long ago, everyone was talking about a local,
Yes.
think globally, act locally.
Yeah.
All these jargon was out there.
Yeah.
But then they realized that the continent Asia was really rising,
Correct.
was developing.
Correct.
And then there are different parts of Asia where you have seen strength, where they met the social indicators are improving, and so on and so forth. But having said that, we still have a hangover from the colonial past, and the concept of power is very much at the central.
Absolutely.
I don't think our governments think of serving the people. Though jargon, rhetoric says that in the name of the people, for the people, with the people. But the with the people is missing.
Correct.
And so therefore it still has to go a long way. And in this struggle, there are countries like China and India which have huge population, and the political actors in those countries have to first meet their constituency, and therefore they are nationalistic. Countries like Bangladesh have to look at the interest of their own country. And there is peculiarities and uniqueness being a Delta, being Bangladesh, being only 52 years old.
Correct.
And trying to survive in this context. You have to do business, you have to do trade, commerce, education, so many different pulls and pushes. So therefore, I am not a proponent, or I don't necessarily agree that people should become nationalists. But you cannot sacrifice the interest of your people because of capitalism.
Absolutely.
Or because of other new colonial masters.
Indeed. You have rightly pointed out, because this is the growing dilemma even among the young leaders like us when we go around the countries, and when we work. Like I was in Afghanistan, and I felt at that point in time as well that many times, because Afghanistan, unfortunately, it's a different story now, but when I was there between 2007 onwards, there was quite hope, nation building. We have to do things our own, but a lot of adaptation from the West. Everything that was done.
And what did they do? They abandoned you.
Because
so they didn't let the national
exactly
organic growth of leadership and institutions. They knew everything what was going to be good for Afghanistan.
Exactly.
And that is the original mindset.
Correct.
If you read, I was reading the history again of British India, East India Company, like they were going to civilize us.
The McKinley education model.
The whole thing about it. So that has not gone away.
Correct.
They know what is best for us.
Correct.
Why?
Correct. And when you ask this question, why, around this, you immediately fall into this whole category of supranationalist, neo-nationalist, and those labels are ready for you.
But I will add here, when we talk about being nationalist and supranationalist, it's always risky because you end up being a fascist. So you have to be clear on where to draw the line.
Exactly.
And we don't live in a world where we can live in an island. We are all interconnected.
Indeed.
And we have to value and respect each other.
Indeed.
And inclusion, the concept of justice and valuing each other is missing. Because by being nationalist, even within a country, when they talk about nationalists, you use the word majoritarian.
Yeah.
Now, and I kind of said, why? Because when it comes to election, you will see anywhere in the world, no government has been elected for more than 50% of the votes. So there is 50% outside with a different view, right? And then they seem to know what's good for us. So we talk about being autocratic. We talk about being nationalist. It's not inclusive, even in a country context. So there is a equation globally, and there's an equation and then there's a serious gender dimension to it, because nationalist forces do not take into consideration the greater community.
Absolutely.
And they actually behave in a colonial manner.
Correct.
Towards the
Correct.
minorities, towards communities who are women and girls and so on. So that has remained very strongly embedded in our practices.
Correct. Yeah, in one of my conversations with a senior colleague in Nairobi last time, he was sharing that, look, if sovereignty is not being linked or adhered to the universal value system that we have on inclusion, feminism, all of these basic feminist principles, then that space is taken over by its politics, nationalism, nationalistic thing, and all of that, where interests are also being carved out, based on your political and power interest. But if there is a universal connection through values, then there is a space for that true democracy, as we talk about, for the debate and dialogue and
For
disagreement.
inclusion for everyone.
Everyone.
Yeah.
For everyone.
Not the 1% or the
Correct.
10%.
Correct. Then it won't go into that dialogue. Coming to this whole part, now when we apply this whole thing into our aid and this whole aspect of development sector and organizations, largely we are bound by the systems designed somewhere else. So we talk a lot about decolonization. We talk a lot about the local voices, local amplification. But then, why our local partners, local organizations are still not equipped completely on their own? Largely, Bangladesh is a bit different story, but largely is because somewhere this systems adaptation, they have to be ready for the system design somewhere else. Do you think that is also one impeding factor in terms of taking the decolonization?
Absolutely. So when we had the grand bargain, and then this became the local buzzword, localization.
Correct.
But what was localization? What did it mean? That was not necessarily shared.
Correct.
So the first point of localization is decentralization
Indeed.
of power. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you have to help systems,
Correct.
institutions, and structures to evolve.
Correct.
Right? So we overnight wanted to go for localization.
Correct.
And then, but we must comply.
Yeah.
Localization cannot be an excuse for non-compliance.
Indeed.
So again, it comes back to values. It comes back to standards. You have to be accountable.
Correct.
You must have your governance and your financial and audits all in place.
Correct.
There's no compromise there.
Correct.
Every penny, every pound, every taka that comes, I must be accountable for it.
Absolutely.
So this support to local organization was not necessarily prioritized. It's like, okay, we're going to do localization. Did you help those organizations to develop the financial structure and governance? Did you help them to have their safeguarding policies? Do they have a gender policy? Do they have an inclusion policy? And do you have the patience to support them?
Correct.
Because you have your targets.
Indeed.
And you will tick the box, say, I've done localization. How did you do localization? I gave money to X in Timbuktu or X in Bandarban or in the Chor areas. How did you do localization? I, gave them the platform to speak about what they need.
Yeah.
What happened in the end? It's what you do, your directives are, what your priorities are. And this is not just for the INGOs. This is true of all development partners.
Yeah.
So when now there is more conversation happening with development partners when they develop country programs, right? But it's still being determined by what is a priority of the country of origin.
Correct.
So for all development partners who come from different parts of the world, they bring their own strategy here and want to implement it.
Yeah.
It's not like when you take the needs of this country and develop your global, your international support strategy. So that's one area that needs to be worked on with serious commitment.
Correct.
Because now if you look at Europe, many of the European countries have had change of government, and that has also influenced the aid. Aid has been now taken over by trade.
Indeed.
So we will do a little bit of aid, but actually there's trade. And you have to realize that Bangladesh today has consumer base with the purchasing power. So every organized business, trade, they all want to come here because if you have 170 million people, of which even half have purchasing power, your business is made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They keep threatening you, but end of the day, so it goes back to capitalism.
Absolutely.
It goes back to how capitalism has evolved. And it's true when you look at the issue of gender and inclusion. It is true when you look at the issues of labor, the rights of workers. They give us this long lecture about workers' rights, but they're not willing to increase 1 penny or 50 cents to invest in the rights. The manufacturers suffer. So there are many examples that can be given. So I think going forward, because we can talk about this for the endlessly. Now, for instance, again in Bangladesh, we have the Rohingya refugees, right? 1+ million people every year at the beginning. The development partners and the INGOs come to here, then there's going to be no more funds. There's going to be a shortage in a joint response plan. Never gets funded. This year, last year, it was like 40%.
Correct.
Why ask to develop a joint response plans if you're not going to fund it?
Correct.
And why are you threatening? Whose responsibility is it?
Correct.
Is it only the responsibility of Bangladesh?
Exactly.
Similarly, I would say people working in Syria,
Correct.
people working in Somalia, people working in Eritrea and Ethiopia will come back and say that we are suffering because there isn't enough funds for the refugees.
Correct.
So the conversation there has to take place.
Correct.
Because we know they can mobilize funds should the international leaders want. They mobilize funds overnight when they want to go for conflict. Correct. Or when they need to buy arms and other things, right?
Absolutely.
So why is the humanitarian sector suffering? Why did we all talk about being human, being a collective human force, humanitarian assistance being a priority? So I think those are the areas where these conversations need to take place. But in the meantime, we need to work to try and develop the relationships, the help to change the mindsets, because among ourselves also we are not decolonized.
Absolutely.
And the mind,
Absolutely.
how we behave with a child, how we behave with the worker, how we, gender engagement or interaction. So all this needs to change. And now there's another piece that is going around: innovation, innovation, innovation. Are you willing to take the innovation?
Correct.
Are you really willing to be innovative?
Yeah.
And I don't know how long we have, but one other piece that I want to share is there's so much hype around artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
But what is artificial intelligence? It's either Ashish or me behind a computer that has created this. So it's a human created knowledge base, not a portal. And we keep getting threatened that artificial intelligence is going to take away the jobs of 40% of the people. Artificial intelligence is the answer to everything. Why? It's good to use technology. It's good to go to Google or Chat GPT, right? Yeah. But that can't be your man, because that is created by a human being, and that human being is bound to have prejudices.
Absolutely.
That human being has its own socialization process. It is not allowed, because if you go and ask Chat GPT or AI for certain responses, you will see how it responds. So we have to be careful that this is being taken again out of proportion. Like, for instance, you and I, we're both heading organizations. We have to spend time on social media. Indeed. Otherwise, you're not getting the, your marking or, KPIs and visibility. Why has this become so important? Because these capitalist organizations have pushed the social media and has made it mandatory that all leaders have to be on LinkedIn, have to be on X, have to be on Facebook. So life and our job have become so difficult.
Indeed. So many, you have pointed out like a lot of things, and I was quite resonating with the fact that how this whole localization, the word being used, sometimes misused. Sometimes I feel even in the terms of like talking about Rohingya. I was asking that, is it like a franchising? Literally they put you these 10, 15 documents, safeguarding policy, this policy, that policy, people tick, 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 mechanically tick, and you got your policy done. how is it like, in an hour, an organization which was not having thought of this becomes like, category of everything now you have.
It's a survival issue for them.
Exactly.
If they don't have that, you want from them.
Exactly.
Or I can't
exactly.
from them.
Exactly. But then in that whole thing, we just reduce the whole core concept of this localization. And I'm afraid sometimes that if it remains and we settle with that, then this whole part of empowerment will start missing out. And we'll just try again and adapting this thing that are available in the market. Lastly, when it comes to the way forward and taking this kind of discussion, I know I keep watching your podcast also, and sometimes your posts are also quite thought-provoking. What do you think? What as INGOs, what as civil society actors, as leaders, as aspiring people, we need to do to take this discourse forward, to understand decolonization in our own way?
So I would have three suggestions. One is that we really have to work on collective power, our collective mobilization, civil society, development partners. There is no alternative to collective action. So we have to come together on that. Secondly, I would say that we need to be more transparent. But what we find is, even in the development sector, even the non-profit sector, there's a power application. Those who are bigger, they're consuming. The smaller ones, they take your people away, they take your ideas away, and so on. So we have to decolonize ourselves as well. And third is, there cannot be any kind of change, any discussion on justice without inclusion. You have to recognize how we behave with the women, the girls, the Adivashis, the indigenous, the persons with disability and unless we are serious about it, unless we show a commitment to that, we will get into this trap. And you can't define growth just by your financial numbers.
Correct.
It has to come through impact.
Indeed. You have so rightly said so. Thank you so much, Abra. I think, you must have found this discussion very intriguing, and I'm sure this must have created few questions in your mind, which is absolutely right. I think that is the impact that we would like to see, to leave you with some more questions. You can write to us in the comment box. This conversation, I think, will really help us in terms of talking about our system, challenging our own behaviors within the organization, outside the organization, within the entire ecosystem of the change that we're trying to pursue. Thank you so much, Abba, for giving your time and coming here and taking this forward. So I would like to appeal now to the viewers, if you like this kind of podcasts, these kind of conversations, do subscribe us, do share these things with your friends and your colleagues, and press the like button. Thank you so much, and see you next time.